Welcome to the Unblocked Creators Podcast. Today I'm interviewing Logan Quinn. Logan is a holistic healthcare practitioner with a background in kinesiology and body-centered psychotherapy. He runs Medicine of Mankind in Vancouver, Canada, and internationally online, where he helps clients wake up to their soul's calling by rehabilitating the body, mind, and soul through applied spirituality, psychotherapy, and kinesiology-based principles. At his practice, clients will often come to him for aid with their body or their mind before realizing that their physical and mental or relationship issues are really tied to their soul's calling, and part of the larger awakening process that can happen through healing the body, mind, and soul. Logan's work with me has played a big role helping me heal my 12-year-long chronic back pain issue. So I can't wait to share his insights and knowledge with you today. Let's jump on to it. Mr. Logan, it's good to see you. All this time since our visits in Vancouver, and a lot has happened since then. So let's start off for our listeners and viewers. You are a somatic therapy practitioner, and a big topic for you is the connection of the mind and body, which there's more and more talk about these days, but it's sort of things that become almost cliche also become sort of vague, I think. So what could we say about the actual nature of the connection of the mind and the body in relation to your work? What does that actually look like to you?
So the way that I would describe that interaction now is probably different than I would have at the beginning of my career. You know, as you study those different realms of consciousness, you can spend time in kinesiology and the body sciences. You can spend time in psychotherapy, studying them in isolation. And like you said, you know, the more you get into a certain pocket of reality, the more cliches tend to show up. That's usually because they're in isolation of the larger whole. So the way I would paint a picture for all of you listening, and hello everybody, is that they are a progression of consciousness. Just like the evolutionary process is the morphing and shaping of matter over time, that would be the evolution process. There's also a concept called involution. And involution is both tied to the structure that dictates what can fill it, just like the body dictates the type of consciousness that will move through it. That's why certain animals are locked into certain biomechanical positions. You know, a reptile that's meant to be eating things on the ground will be splayed out on the floor and has a very hard time looking upwards. That's why birds of prey are perfectly matched to be able to get something like a lizard. The lizard can't look upwards. Structure dictates function, and function dictates structure. So the mind and body are a mirror of the evolution and involution that are happening simultaneously as the universe is trying to discover new combinations of complexity. Does that make sense? Yeah. And then there's this whole other component of, like, I mentioned those two, the body and the mind, if you will, the operating software, and this governing set of laws and mathematics and physics that basically, I'll say, like, enslave these two bottom layers. It's not a very polite way of putting it, but we can talk about that later.
Amazing. Yeah, that's a really interesting way to think about it. So before we dive too far into the deep stuff, let's give a little bit of context. I met you almost 2 years ago, I suppose, coming up on 2 years, at a conference centered around plant medicines, the Spirit Plant Medicine Conference. And you were there with a sort of a sit-up massage table set up, and telling people about what you offer and some other people that you were working with. And I walked by, and I don't know, I guess probably I noticed the massage table and thought, oh, I got back pain. I should talk to that guy. And as soon as I talked to you, you asked, "Oh, can I feel what's going on?" And you put your hand on part of my back, and you started looking, and you looked at my body, and you started describing what you were seeing going on. And it was kind of startling to me because suddenly, for the first time ever, someone was describing in incredibly accurate detail not only where I was likely feeling stuff and what it might be feeling like, but how my body was holding these patterns of tension and in various parts of my body. So I was kind of blown away, and and then we stayed in touch, and we've done various kinds of work together since. But what's your experience? What's your story? What's your recollection of
Well,
our origin?
I'd been called to that conference for the first time through a psychedelic dispensary that I was collaborating with. They're two friends that I had met through a community in Vancouver who were starting a new company together, providing different medicines. And this was the first year for them to be able to go to the plant medicine conference. They needed some assistance, and I had been working on them as clients for a while, and they're like, well, if you'd like to advertise, we can share a booth. It was a perfect opportunity for me to kind of choose finally to actually enter into the psychedelic space in a more formal format. I've been in it up until that point for about four or 5 years, but my background in how I choose to operate really is that while those are beautiful, they're not necessary. And when I say those, I mean the entire psychedelic space, the different substances and plants that you can engage with. What I've been trained in is to press those same buttons mechanistically through a variety of techniques, therapeutic approaches on the body and on the ego. It's a little bit more of a precise understanding of what it is that these things are opening for you in an uncontrolled fashion. So I've had a bit of a love-hate relationship. I love getting to know these substances and these cousins of ours, if you will, you want to call them those, on this planet. But I had kept that community at a distance for a time, and it was my first stepping into that. And I wanted to provide an opportunity for people to see that to access these beautiful things that this whole conference is built around does not necessitate flooding yourself with a substance. So I put up this booth to exhibit some of that through, like you experienced, some of the body work, but also some of the analysis I can provide and suggestions. I'm like, whoa, great. Okay, like I can work on you with my elbow and I can shut some things off and I can get you to access altered states of consciousness, but my elbow becomes no different than a plant medicine. And that's where you and I kind of started that conversation eventually. We would just went, oh, well, yeah, it's a bit of a dead end. So let's keep going. Let's discover what this opens, and what that opens then allows for the growth process. It's not about the substance or the technique at all. And I think people kind of, get a little stuck on that. So it was a beautiful opportunity to go and meet people and start that conversation.
So there's a lot of parallels between this world of what you can access through use of tools like psychedelic medicines and the work you do in somatic experiencing work. What would you say about what is it that people are able to do with the help of those medicines, and how is it that the work you do can tap into those same patterns?
So, I know I alluded in the conversation about going to this Spirit Plant Medicine conference around some of the things I wanted to bring to the surface for people to just have another layer of the conversation that I think is often skipped over. And that's part of this question that you're asking, which I love. There are many ways to free up these two bottom layers. We talked about at the beginning, the body and the mind, which are two progressions of evolution and involution. Plant medicines are one way to really blast that process open very quickly. And there's a lot of things that happen when you enter altered states of consciousness through these medicines. But if you want to sum it up into one large thing that is happening, essentially it's making the boundary between the subconscious mind and the conscious mind more permeable, so that things can move in either direction much more quickly. basically that filter that pushes things out of our conscious mind so that we can navigate this 3D world gets lessened. And in that process, all of these things can come up to the surface. Now, nowhere in that does that necessitate a plant medicine. It's one of the tools that allows for that boundary to soften a little bit. But just like a dysfunctional gut, if it's locked or braced or not functional in some way long enough, that sensation is going to be filtered out of the conscious mind, pushed into the subconscious. Now, there's a button there. There's something happening on a physical level that can be worked on to mobilize the energy. That could be done through diet, that could be done through manual therapy, that could be done through somatics or breath work. Each system, when it's not functioning properly in the body and in the mind, has an action that isn't happening. And if you program that action, it will start to mobilize that locked up energy, which will then bring that energy and the context and the story and all the feelings of it back from the subconscious into the conscious. Plant medicines are just one way to do that en masse very quickly with a lot of different systems all at the same time. That's why people are like, it's like 10 years of therapy in a night. And it's like, yeah. And if you were meant to live life that quickly, you would be living in that dimension all the time. So like, let's take this conversation with a little bit more nuance, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. So it makes me kind of, I'm connecting some dots to before, like you talked about other biological beings, like a lizard, for example, how it's very constrained to the patterns of its evolutionary path. And we have maybe more range in many ways than a lizard does, but we could still get very constrained into patterns of that are either related to survival or protecting ourselves in different ways. So those patterns of self-protection serve a purpose at a time in a context, but then they often become dysfunctional, right? So for me, I was really called to work with you largely because of this chronic back pain I've dealt with. And so, I'm totally open to sharing on this podcast anything I've shared with you, really, because I think a lot of the most universal, the most personal stuff is the most universal. And so if something I can share can be helpful to people, then that's great. And working with you, I had this experience of pain that was very localized in one spot for 10 years, open up and shift around. And that spot on the left side of my back, after 10 years, has dissolved completely. And now there's a similar but different pain on my right side of my body. But the relief of something that felt like an object lodged in my back, it felt like structural damage. It moved. So that felt kind of miraculous to me. And a lot of that wasn't at all working on my body. You didn't do a lot of direct working on my body. It was more so us talking. So you were able to help me unpack stuff and bring things to the surface and explore emotional content that maybe I was semi-aware of or not at all aware of. And it's still kind of mysterious to me how we got that energy to move again.
I know there's a question coming, but I'm gonna jump in anyway. It's odd for me to hear you say that, and I'm recognizing I've somehow managed to become a bit of I don't want to put this title on me, but I'll say like a back specialist. This is now 3 clients with like 5 to 10 years of chronic back pain that's been debilitating that have come with that same story and through the same process, just described. They're like, I don't know what happened. We just talked a little bit or we did some somatic work and it's like it's shifted. And it's fun to watch what themes come up as a therapist, in your clients, because they're clearly mirroring something in you. And to the degree that you can work well with a client and get those things to move, it shows you something about yourself. You know, the stories that you have in some way are my own as well. The pain that you have in your body might show up differently for me, but it's a very similar story. So, it was a real pleasure to experiment on you a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure grateful because now I believe that whatever's going on this other side, I can continue to
Yeah,
unlock and unravel.
it's a beautiful reference to
So,
have.
uh, a topic that is a real running theme for me, and it's a real running theme on my podcast, The Unblocked Creators, is the topic of personal agency and the ability to have a say in how we move energy in our lives. And so I wonder if that is that something that you directly think about much, how what's happening for people is as they gain access to that stuff, they're able to have more agency over how they're maybe more agency over the range of their psyche.
Yeah,
Something
I
like that.
mean, let me answer this question by looping back the very first thing that I created context for, and this is now the third time I've mentioned it, but we've talked about the first two layers of that involution process, the evolution of consciousness, and that happens first through the body level of consciousness, then the ego, and then this third component. And in your question, that's kind of what I hear, is that the agency implies that there is an agent that is working on and with all these other things. Who is the one that's supposed to be in control? Is that supposed to be your body? Probably not. Is that supposed to be your mind? In some ways of looking at the universe, if you're a materialistic scientific approach of the modern 19th, 20th, and 21st century, that's as high as you can get in terms of like what is real and who should be the agent. From that lens, your ego, your identity, which is the sum total of everything happening in your body and in your mind, would be the agent. Now, if you've taken any plant medicines, you know that that's not true. And that doesn't necessarily have to be through plant medicines. You could go through a really deep somatic experience and realize there is a consciousness that is moving your body despite what you want. That there is even an intelligence behind when your body starts to heal, you are not the one doing it. When someone miraculously starts to snowball the healing of a chronic illness that's been there for years, such as something like stage 4 cancer starting to shift, yes, there's a physical component, there's diet and lifestyle changes that absolutely need to happen. There's a mental component of how you relate to things that changes what energy is free, but the change is including and transcending those two things. There's a larger consciousness at play that moves the energy along in a way that you're not micromanaging every single step. If I asked someone who had cancer who healed it, what did you do? They would say, I did these things, but like they wouldn't be able to say how they cleared the tumor from their body. What did that? The scientific approach would say your body's consciousness did that, but where did that programming come from? From billions of years of evolution. What were the pressures that created that programming in the body and the mind to allow that to happen, for physiology to snap back into function? There's a mathematics to the universe that governs all of us. That intelligence that is shaping functional life to experience itself is the conversation around what and where that seat of consciousness is coming from, where the agent is. And that's where those of us in this community, we talk about, I know I'm going on a ramble here, so I hope you guys are listening. We are a drop in the ocean, or rather an ocean in a drop. So this larger mathematics, we are all a subsect of. And when you start to heal these things on a physical level in your life, so come back to your question here. Yes, energy moves in many different ways, and that can be themes in your life. That can be the progression of your hero's journey. You went from being in one career path to having all these experiences that didn't work out, that reoriented you over here. Those were all pressures that like morphed and shaped and massaged you to force you to understand how to navigate yourself and life. And as that energy frees up, the riverbed changes and carves a different path. And that carves a different path through your body and through your mind. And the energy will flow differently through you. It will open up different aspects of yourself you've never known. And therefore, you're no longer the same person. So, yes, like, and to sum up my answer here, doing these things are one way to help redirect also your life path. You can go through the nitty gritty of the somatic conversation or the plant medicine integration route, or you could just talk of the same way that like someone who loves traveling talks. Of like, look, I want to live an exciting lifestyle and I create a bucket list that I want to accomplish before I die. There's an intelligence in your body orienting you to those goals. When you pursue that, anything that blocks you from accomplishing that will come to the surface, and life will massage you into becoming the person who can live into that. You can go to therapy, or you can just go and travel. Both are going to get you there eventually.
Wow, we're looking at a lot of layers at the same time here, where there's pain in the body, but then there's also the intelligence behind working with that is the same intelligence that can bring order to like the larger story that is giving meaning to your life, the adventure of your life.
It is a vastly, it's beautiful. It's a very beautiful and complex conversation. It's something that you can't fully know, which, you know, we can get to at some point. But I think that is the thing that motivates me to like want to discover anything. There is something moving all of us through our lives. We're not just reacting to life. What is that thing is the ultimate question.
Well, could you share a bit about how you got called into these different chapters, more recent chapters of your life, and how that connects to earlier chapters?
Do you want to maybe pinpoint a particular chapter or like question?
Well, so one thing we've resonated on is we've both kind of been involved to some different degrees in the performance arts. You've been involved in circus and working with people's bodies in that world. I was involved in magic and lots of circusy types around me as well. And I can ride a unicycle, and so there's a lot of fun overlap there. But at some point, you also discovered some new layers to beyond what you first understood about the body from more of like a kinesiology perspective, right? And into the somatic work. And also right now you're on an interesting adventure. And so I'm curious about what's opening up now.
I would say being a kid again is the point of this chapter in a lot of ways. I started this whole journey in, I would say as early as age 4. I was a kid, got brought to the movies in 1999 to go watch Disney's Tarzan on the big screen. Yeah.
Was that your first theater movie?
Yes.
Mine too.
Of course, more links. Yes,
that's amazing.
That was the thing that like it clicked. Something in me had a button that was ready to be pressed, and that movie pressed it, and it was like, this guy that you're watching on screen, that's you, motherfucker, and you're gonna go through a similar journey. And so much of my life has mirrored, whether through a bias of wanting to be like Tarzan, or that he just represented something that I also am kind of like. It brought me into wanting to do karate and gymnastics, and I originally wanted to be a wildlife vet. But all those things aside, really what I learned from wanting to be Tarzan when I was a kid was the aliveness and the vulnerability of being connected to everything. Tarzan in that movie, he's alone in the jungle. He starts to meet humans for the first time, and he falls in love with discovering something new. It changes him in a fundamental way that unlocks parts of his heart that weren't accessible when he was on his own. I have a similar journey. I was an only child. My mom was adopted. We're kind of isolated from the rest of our family. I resonate a lot with that story. And while I went the route of trying to create the facade of Tarzan all these years, that brought me into circus and performances, right? Like the very on stage side of things. I know you get that. It's one way to like bring that feeling forward is to act it out, which is why somatic therapy can work. But it can also be performative. And I kind of reached that threshold in a lot of ways. And therapy is also another way that eventually that becomes performative. It is a thing, therapy, whether that physiotherapy or psychological therapy, is meant to rehabilitate your ability to be in the world. You're not meant to be identified with the performance or the training for performance. You're meant to just live. And I got stuck, the last 4 or 5 years, not living fully. And this journey coming here, I'm in Bali right now, is trying to find that thread again that made me feel so alive watching Tarzan, is to just be in life and let life start to change you in ways that are more vulnerable than therapy could ever be. Because I'm literally saying yes to life fucking with me and learning lessons through that, rather than trying to unpack it in a safe little container with a therapist who's going to make sure that everything is about me. I think I'm ready for something beyond that framework. Yeah.
Cool. A couple of things you reminded me of. One is like you've talked to me a bit about the idea of therapist-centered therapy, in that if you're a practitioner there to help someone on their journey and it isn't lighting you up, then can you really be showing up for them? Is that sort of where is that sort of
Yeah,
the idea behind
so
that?
therapist-centered therapy was it was a rebuttal that my mentor had to some of the training methods in the university setting, which is client-centered therapy. A lot of counselors will probably resonate having heard that term before in different ways, replace the title, but they've been taught a similar concept, which is basically you're there to serve the client. And the answer is no. I don't come into existence to serve anybody but myself. God, the universe, is wanting to experience something through me, and it chose to view the world through this set of lens. And the best service that I can do is to make sure that this experience is looked after first and that I'm getting what I want. If I don't do that, I'm probably playing out some sort of childhood wound trying to please other people first. Now, I think, bless the therapeutic, training programs. They're pointing to something important. Yeah, someone's paying you. You're supposed to look after what's going on for them. And if you make it about yourself, you're probably projecting something on them rather than just genuinely listening. But you're also projecting if you're not listening to what you need out of this. There's an intelligence to, okay, I'm sitting in front of you, Jesse. I will use an example. Jesse and I are in a session and I start to feel bored and I'm checking out of what he's telling me and he's rambling kind of like Logan does on this podcast. He's just kind of going off on tangents and the intelligence in my body is saying this isn't interesting. And if I just try and be a good boy and really force myself to listen, I'm skipping over something here. There's probably a wound that Jesse has experienced in his life where people tune out of conversation with him. That may have started way back with mommy and daddy. And I'm experiencing that same thing with him right now. How is this actually contributing to how Jesse causes himself to be dismissed by people? He might be on an unconscious level inviting me into that layer of his life. And if I'm not listening to what my body is saying, I can never mirror that back to him and honestly ask him, hey, do you ever notice people checking out of conversation with you? Oh, you do. How does that make you feel? And now we've actually opened a locked door. But if I deny that that door even exists and blame that on me because I'm supposed to be serving you, I'm literally walking into therapy like this. So it's the same thing with life, right? You know, I loop it back as I ramble, and I do that same thing of filtering certain listeners out. Like, this guy talks way too much. Life is kind of the same thing, right? I have to make it about this experience first before I have anything to connect with people on. And the more I know myself and how this thing wants to experience life, the joys, the hero's journey I want to go on, the struggles that I'm willing to undertake, and why that's important to me, that will bring me to conversations with people that get that. And then I can find my people. And then I can find the places that I should be operating in. But if I don't start that orientation to be about myself, then I'll end up in a 9-to-5 job working for 60 years for somebody that I don't care about and in a field that I don't believe in.
It's very subtle. It's a very subtle sort of awareness to realize that the way that you're being present in your own awareness and your own body is going to have such an impact on working with the client.
I'll continue my little answer here for you to say that I think this is one of the beauties of being an only child. We each get shaped by being born into different types of family dynamics, and mine was being very, very isolated. So that subtle narcissistic orientation that can be present for an only child does show you certain truths about the universe. It can also be insular and be a confirmation bias if you don't then meet people who aren't like you and have them soften some of those edges. But there is a truth that you do get very easily taught when you're an only child versus being in a family. One of those things with being in family is that, connecting with other people above your own needs often teaches you about types of love you never would have had by being alone. So there's pluses and minuses in each direction.
Okay, so in our sessions, I would come out to your place and not really knowing what to expect. I just knew this guy seems to have some awareness of what's going on in my body. I'm searching for a healing path, and often I'd sit on the couch in your space and start talking about my creative struggles or the direction my life is going, what I'm trying to figure out about life decisions. And you would often direct me to notice how I'm positioning my body and to notice where these different concerns kind of lived in my body. And I would reposition myself unconsciously when I changed the topic to some frustration, maybe, or worry, and you would just kind of sometimes point at that or ask me a question about something way beyond, and how does that make you feel? It's much more like I don't know if I could recall exactly, but it would be some kind of prompt for me to be aware of my body again. And often it would make me realize something about how I feel about what I'm talking about and continue to investigate that. So, as a practitioner, how do you is it just I don't know. How do you know what to inquire about to allow someone to continue their own
Yeah.
investigation?
So I feel like this is like a fun teaching moment for those listening that like want to be students of different methods. You know, it's like you get to listen to a podcast and have some education too. Let me ask you a question. You were searching for the question just now, and what did you do to find it? How did you get there? Yeah, you're doing it right now. So there's a few
Hmm.
things. You're probably feeling your
Hmm.
body to some degree and maybe the discomfort that's there. There's a bit of energy that's kind of funneling you upwards into your head. Your eyes looked upwards. Clearly, the energy is trying to search, and the most likely place is the seat of the ego, just the noodle, rather than down into the body. And you danced a little bit between the two. You went down while you were asking questions. You went up, and you're like neither one of these, but somewhere between neither one being the full context of the question, you could see the what was written between the two lines. The mind was writing this line of questioning. Maybe you could ask Logan about this. And the body said, no, no, ask him about down here. But neither one of them was really the gateway to what you were wanting to ask. And it was between those two lines that there was an answer. And sometimes that's a little bit more vague because it's about the underlying current that creates both of these questions. So that's a bit of an esoteric, woo-woo way of describing that same process. Is you look in multiple places and you have to infer. And that's why therapy is not a hard science. When the modern scientific realms of research say, therapy is somewhat made up, what they're missing is that it's not measurable in the same traditional sense as like I can tell how many atoms are in this water bottle if I deconstruct it under a microscope or I weigh it. But there's still a truth behind how the universe creates this thing that's happening. When you understand that language, you can actually start to read the subtext. So the body paints some of that picture, and that's why you talked about, oh, you're going through something difficult about your creative endeavor, and you asked me questions, but you didn't really know what to ask. And actually, your body's telling me part of the story. You feel uncomfortable about this segment of what you're struggling with, and maybe that's your mom or your dad's judgment of what you're doing. And as you're talking about that, your body is telling me how it's trying to avoid that stressor. Oh, so you're avoiding a stressor, which means you're avoiding some truth here to try and sneak around this issue with mom and dad so that you could be free in some way. So that's part of this struggle that you're dealing with. Let's go into that. And then I can know to some degree what's actually happening based off of what your body chose to do. There's two major things that the body will do in the face of a stressor. It will either deaden itself so that it doesn't have to feel what's happening. And deadening itself could be like freezing a limb in place long enough. If I leave my arm overhead for 5 minutes, my hand will go numb. The lack of movement and proprioceptive stimulus to the proprioceptors in the body and a bunch of different mechanoreceptors. These are all kinesiology terms here. I'm sure some will understand. If those aren't being stimulated constantly, your body loses awareness of where this limb is in space and what's happening to it. So you could do that with your breathing, right? If you limit your breathing, you stop becoming aware that you're stressed. Great. Now mom and dad yelling at you about your career choices has no effect on you. You can't feel it. It's not entering. You're not letting it register. So you could have been doing that while we're talking, and then I'm like, okay, let's get you breathing properly so that that energy comes up so that you actually know what you're feeling, and then we can continue the conversation because you'll find the answers by feeling. And then there's option number two, which is you brace, you resist what is coming up, maybe about mom and dad, and your body tightens. Rather than deadening and slackening, it will, in an attempt to either shield and ward off that oncoming threat, or to mobilize and attack that thing to get rid of it. Now, if that movement doesn't fully come out, we got to figure out which one of those it's doing. And then by virtue of letting that action come out and tiring it out, you'll be able to hear what it was trying to defend, which is, some part of you feels vulnerable and you want to please your mom and dad because you love them. And somehow tied to your career is actually this childhood wound of wanting to be loved for what you do by mom and dad. And now you're conflating and you can't actually act upon your real desire in your career 20 years later, because tied to listening to me is also wanting to please mommy and daddy. And that showed up in how your body braced when you were talking. And I can read that. And that's just one layer. All the things that you're also saying and how you choose to enunciate and where your mind goes in the story tells me a lot about the conflict you're having internally with this subject. And your body and mind are trying to offload the story. Talking is one way to offload the stressor. Moving or deadening is another way. And each system in the body and in the ego has a means to avoid stressor. When you're trained to look for that, you are capable of working with these buttons that plant medicines just obliterate entirely.
Wow, that's a beautiful answer. You kept proceeding to answer my next questions.
I think I have a habit of doing that, yeah.
Which is great. It's great. It's fantastic. Well, it brought me much more into a clear awareness of a lot of what was going on in those sessions, in unpacking, for one, like expectations that I didn't know I was still putting myself under, that maybe were put on me at some point in my life, right? So that could be mom and dad. It could be not breaking certain rules or not getting judged for certain curiosities or interests, or other than mom and dad, even, just being humiliated by something or ashamed of something, and then pushing that into the unconscious, pushing it out of awareness and creating a pattern to continually be able to avoid
and you
that.
can see that and how your body gets structured,
That's amazing.
right? The compounding effect of that, taking something that was external, it registering consciously and entering you, and then it being ingrained in your subconscious and unconscious. And those are two different things, which we can get to. What is the unconscious? Where does that get stored? Well, that's in the body, right? Are you aware of how many trillions of cells are in your body constantly, working together to keep you built, functioning, or digesting your food? No, that's filtered into the unconscious. So all of these old stories and all these things that have happened to you, they're in your body. And to some degree in the wiring of your brain and your persona. And when you can read between the lines of how someone shows up and their personality, you can see the influences that would have created that kind of personality. To the degree that that personality is functional, tells me the past, was well handled. If that personality has a hard time navigating reality, the reality of the body, the reality externally, that tells me where we need to look.
So one of the things that kind of opened up for me toward the end of our, more so not just the sessions that I began doing with you, but when I did a sort of a mentorship program with you, toward the end of that, there was a lot on the topic of spontaneous movement of energy. And that's fascinating to me because, well, for one thing, maybe a lot of people won't know, and hopefully I have this sort of right. Somatic therapy, I believe, sort of stemmed from observing animals like shaking off their stressors or traumatic experiences, just letting whatever energy needed to move.
Yeah, yes. Many trainings often point to there's a certification out there called TRE, and TRE was based on getting trained on how the body stores trauma without having to go and get like your doctorate or your PhD. So it was a means for the masses to kind of get some understanding of it. And a lot of modern counseling is based on some of those principles. That you talk about the shaking, the convulsions, right? And you see an animal, on a Nat Geo documentary get chased by a lion, and it finally makes it to safety, and then you see it in the tree or in its place of safety, and it will almost look like it's shivering for a time, and you'll see the skin undulating on its body. And it might happen all the way down to like a skeletal level, like the whole body will shake, or it will throw up, right? Different systems spontaneously convulsing to offload the stressor. So yeah, therapies are based around that principle. I sense that you're kind of wanting to ask about, well, what's the point of that?
Well, partly, yes, but maybe I want to point at, I think you also touched on a really important key there, which is when they get to the place of safety, because it's like, how can you express those parts of yourself that were violating expectations of others or putting you in a threatening situation until you're in a situation where somehow your psyche knows that you're safe to do so.
There's a few, man, we're really getting into like a therapy training podcast here. This is fun. Okay. I'll try and keep this as simple as I can here, but there's a few components to what you're talking about. Number one is like there's a rehabilitation of finding safety, right? Because you could put someone in the safest possible room they could be in. You could even put them into like protected custody, from the government if they're being abused by their parents, and they're as safe as they possibly can be, but they're not safe enough in their body, perception-wise, to let anything come out. Right? My mom's a good example. Her being adopted, she was safe away from a family that didn't fully love her, and yet couldn't offload the stressor until decades later. So there's a matter of like rehabilitating your ability to be safe, and that's a whole conversation of what goes into that. And then there's also rehabilitating your ability to tolerate what needs to come out, because you can feel that you're safe environmentally, but you may not be feeling safe with the amount of energy that's stored in your body that needs to come out. So you can trust the world, but you don't trust yourself on some subtle level to be able to handle that much energy, because it's threatening. Because the implication of that much energy running through your body is, I might die. The memory of that felt sense is, I'm going to die, just like an animal being chased by a lion. Anytime that you have a sympathetic response, the sympathetic response is a survival response. It's mobilizing you towards, I need to kill something, I need to get to that target for some reason, or I need to run away from this thing. It's mobilizing you away from your baseline and saying that there's something happening here that you need to be very aware of. Otherwise you might what? You might fucking die. So that's very threatening. And anytime that there's a really deeply stored memory of that isn't being processed, the threat of that coming to the surface is no different than the body and mind feeling like it may die if it lets itself feel this thing. So there's letting yourself feel safe in the world, and then there's this whole other thing about letting yourself feel safe in your body for different types of stimulus. Both of those need to be handled and then eventually rejoined together before you then bring that person out into the world. You can't do either one of these in isolation of each other and count that as having been fully looked at the problem. And you also can't have just done these two things not in the sports setting. We would say the return to play. You want to bring the athlete back to the competition setting to see if they can do the movement they did in the physio room on the performance stage. And that for a human being is out in the real world. And that's a whole nother level of rehabilitation.
Yeah. Well, I really like this topic of performance versus play. I think there's artists I've had on the podcast already who we've talked a lot about um, moving into a mode with their art that's very free from outcome and like unattached to how it's received by others and just purely playing. And as for myself, lately, tonight's a karaoke night, actually, after this call. I'm going to go up the road, drink some club soda, and, and let my voice open up. And I'm doing that as an exercise, partly because I've never thought of myself as a singer. And I thought, let's just push the boundary. And partly because I feel like opening my voice will open up different aspects of my mind for myself to allow that expression that I typically wouldn't allow of myself. And typically social environments don't allow it. Not me anyway. So not going to let me sing. Um, and also to do it without alcohol, like going up to karaoke night in front of 50 or 100 people and just saying, okay, Jesse, you're going to go up there and get on the microphone. And it's not to impress anybody, because there's much more impressive singers. It's more like, can I just do it anyways? I'm afraid to do it. Is my tribe going to kill me? Or, am I going to go out of bounds here? And the reality is it's very safe. And half the people there won't even remember me. But I've found that to be a really fun way to kind of return to that mode of pure play.
I'm glad you intuited to shift the conversation in that direction, because I'm sure you and those watching could notice as I felt reluctant to answer that last question. And the reason why is it gets you stuck in a certain way of thinking, to be that mechanical with life. Life isn't supposed to be dissected. Can you? Yes, if you're going to talk about like how to strategically heal something or rehabilitate, yeah, but eventually you have to let all of that go, which was the point of like that part of the lesson you alluded to in spontaneity. And the same thing that animal's doing is it's not in control of the spontaneous convulsions. It's letting yourself be open to the thing that needs to happen despite how you feel about it. And that's where the magic of life can come in and fill you with something you never expected. Like the joys of being in karaoke and getting through that, man, now you might experience something that you never would have known is even out there. So the letting go of this way, that I was describing to you, of answering people's questions or helping them in therapy, is also my stepping into being more human with people and helping them remember that is the point of this. So much of the world has been attached to this hierarchy of looking to mommy, daddy figures, professionals. Please save me because you know better. And it's like, eventually, to get free again, you have to treat each other as humans and talk from this level. I don't know any better than the person in front of me. In fact, we're just both here going up on stage, feeling a little nervous about what we're doing, and either acting like we don't know what we're doing or that we do know what we're doing to try and protect ourselves. But we're all just kids, just going, whoa, this is a little scary. And I want to do this because it feels exciting. It feels like I want to experience this kind of love and to be witnessed by someone.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. A lot of the conversations last year, before we didn't see each other for like 6 months, were leading up to my big adventure down in the desert. And I remember you just being so curious and just just excited for me. And yeah, that was very encouraging. And then it just sort of, it unlocked some courage, because that was the thing. It was just a step of, it was a leap. I didn't really know what was going to happen. I didn't even have a lot of financial backing. I just went for it, and I flew down to Nevada, California, spent some time in Arizona. I was down there for 97 days, and it was an adventure of a lifetime. And I remember you also talking to me then a little bit about thinking maybe something like that might be in store for you, something along those lines you were starting to consider. And so it wasn't just you trying to unpack Jesse's psyche and analyze it. We were having fun together. And what that did for me, it has led to so many other new things opening up that's really exciting. And so it feels like my mind is a lot less wrapped up now than ever in what anybody expects of me, or making sure I'm not embarrassed, or making sure no one doesn't understand my path, because I don't either. So,
Yeah.
so what's Bali teaching you that Vancouver?
Yeah. Many things. Where to start? I was very excited, when you started voicing this desire to be out there, because I was recognizing, in the step-by-step process, I was starting to be more comfortable with that idea for myself, and you showed up. And I was like, oh God, okay, I might actually have to consider this thing that I've known deep down for a long time. There was a road trip that I went on in 2020, just as the lockdowns were about to happen. I was originally trying to get down here, actually, to Australia after graduating university, and circumstances were such that I couldn't get to the country. And I've known since that day, it was like there's an unmet desire to be out in the world more and learning something. And that road trip was a beautiful learning lesson in that. I had 30 days in the back of my truck road tripping across Canada, and I came back from that with such a deep connection to myself. And I say myself, like, on a body level, the cadence of life that I wanted to live by, the way I wanted to relate to my mind and care for it, the you know I could listen each day to what my mind was curious about and actually act on it because I wasn't too busy. And also, by virtue of doing those two things on an extended period, I was open to life moving me in a direction that it wanted me to move. And I came back changed in a way that I couldn't have expected. And Bali's a lot like that. It's a lot like that in the sense that I didn't know what I was coming down here for. I knew there was a big change that needed to happen in my life. I've been feeling it for a long time. And who am I to say that I know what that change needs to be? Otherwise, it would have happened by now, right? So I have to enter this transformation process and let unexpected things massage me. And it hasn't all been pleasurable. I thought coming down here would be this exciting thing of redrafting my business, and I'd be doing all these things, meeting the community and being of service. And no, in fact, quite a lot of it has been slow the fuck down. You're not going to interact with anybody. In fact, you're not going to do a lot of those touristy things of being in this beautiful place. And you're going to sit by yourself for a month and a half. And, and that has been a very difficult practice. Way easier for me in 2020, just graduating university. You're still somewhat a kid at that point. You haven't fully entered the workforce. So the pressures of keeping a standard of how the world perceives you isn't as strong. Now I run a business. I've had this practice for 5.5 years, and stopping that machine from churning brought up a lot of stuff for me. And it's taken a month and a half of like, nope, you're not allowed to fully get back to work, to deal with all of the judgments that I would have of myself about that. And it's behind those judgments that the actual blocks in my life were hidden, which was, I'm doing all of this to please the outside world. This whole trip was about finding the deeper intelligence of my life and what it wants me to do to be happy. And if any of it was performative or for someone else, it was giving me roadblocks that I didn't understand why they were there until I sat doing nothing for a long time. And I'm just starting to feel like things are moving now. There's been a lot of emotions that have come up recently around things that happened 20 years ago that have been notoriously hard in therapy to even excavate. And yet life is doing that for me if I just take a risk and stand on stage doing some karaoke. Metaphorically speaking, of course.
Yep. Yeah. So how do you know what that, I mean, if it's an uncomfortable thing, it's not necessarily exciting on the surface. How, what are you listening for to know that that's
Jesse.
the call right now?
So all of you listening, this is where things get a little more complex. We have the very basic container of the body. It's quite simple. It works via on-off. So when you look at dysfunction, is it too far locked into the on position or the off position? The ego is a little more complex. It works as a trinity. So it's got, this or that, right? Good or bad. And who's the one judging that? The ego. So the seat of the identity is your persona, and it looks at the world around you and it goes, I want this or I want that. I want this career, not that one. I want love, not hate. And it's like, okay. Well, when you move up another dimension and talk about the soul, and we can get to that some other time, shit gets even more complex. There's more data points to track to figure out what truth is. And it's not as personally oriented. My ego may not necessarily want these experiences on the surface because it thinks that if I do this, I'm going to get what I want. And the larger intelligence of the universe is saying, no, my boy, you don't need that. In fact, that's not going to fulfill you. But you're so hell-bent on thinking that that's the thing, you're not even open to what might actually give you the feeling you're looking for. So we're going to have to sit you down and give you what you don't want until you realize that that was never what you wanted in the first place. And then you might start asking the right questions. And at other times that might show up as like, you can actually just listen to your highest excitement and take the risk of, doing something like, I want to be alive in the way that karaoke in front of 100 people would make me feel. And just doing that. So to metaphorically or mythopoetically, answer your question, that's what Bali has been. And that's how listening to it works. And there's a different practice now. There's no right or wrong, because you have to be okay with going down the wrong path to learn something. And that's part of the hero's journey of being someone who can tolerate all the ups and downs of life without judging yourself for it. That's the ultimate return to play setting. You will not do everything correctly. And through not doing things correctly and being okay with it, you're actually surrendering to the exact therapeutic process the universe is bringing you through.
Wow. Interesting. Because I brought up agency and you had quite an incredible answer to that. It's like, it's not just that I want to break out of all the conditioning so that I can do what Jesse's ego thinks he wants. It's like there's a deeper self, a deeper interconnected self that that's mysterious to us. And that is locked up and blocked off and needs to be accessed.
And sometimes you have to slowly attract it through others because it's too vulnerable for you. So I had to watch you go through that thing first before I was like, you know what? I can do that.
Yeah. That's amazing. You brought up a word that a lot of people might not have ever heard before, mythopoetic. And I finally have listened to most of one of the books in that realm, the Warrior King, Magician Lover. What could you say about the relevance or the meaning to you of a mythopoetic lens
Hmm.
to look at life?
Well, I mean, so you're talking about the book by Roger Moore and Douglas Gillette, great, neo-Jungian psychologist. It's an amazing book, and it's one way to look at the male psyche and its archetypes. They place it into 4 categories, and that's one example of mythopoetic, meaning the king, the warrior, the magician, and the lover. Those are all roles that you'll find in a lot of ancient myths in some way, and that's one way to also rank the things that need to happen in a man's life to complete the hero's journey in some way. So, how do I answer this? Because it's such a big realm to talk about. The mythopoetic lens is just a way to poeticize life and to use archetypes to categorize and meaning make the experience of beauty. And you can label it as different types of beauty. I think it's awesome. That's why I love movies. That's why I worked in the film industry for a long time, is that it reminds you of the type of beauty that is internal through these stories that are true, even though they may not have ever happened. We talk about parables and how Christianity often writes its stories in potential parables. Maybe some of these things didn't actually happen. Maybe some of them did, but yet there is truth even if it didn't happen. So how is something true if it didn't happen? Well, the teaching behind it paints a truth that is always happening. The fact that you can feel resonance with the parable or the story tells me that you have lived that story that you're reading in the Bible, or that you've watched by watching Harry Potter, and you feel the journey that he's been on, and you cry because that's also your story. Art is a way to feel yourself. It's one of the most beautiful love languages that I think people commodify. And we could get into the whole social media conversation, which I'll try not to do that now. But really, for me, it's one of the greatest love languages. It's creating song out of something you want to say without having to use this mechanical language I've just spent the last hour using. And when you read something that's written in that way, like this book, it touches you in a way that this scientific analysis can't. It touches a different part of your heart. And that's just as valid. I love this other stuff that I just, depicted how I operate in, very sciencey, and that makes me feel seen because it really cuts through all the bullshit and says, this is what's happening, here's how to work on it, and here's the consistency of that being repeatable amongst people. That's a way to love people. They have a problem. Let me help you understand yourself. And just like learning an instrument, you learn the rules so that you can break them. Mythopoeticism is starting to break that because it's artistry, it's not science. It speaks to the love language of story. And the greatest story ever told is this one in existence that God is dreaming up right now. So if you can look at life as the most beautiful story and make it a movie or the best song or the best poem that you want for yourself, it will touch a part of your heart that being mechanical won't.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that that's a large part of what I'm up to now with this, bringing on all kinds of creators to talk about what what allows them to live that life of excitement and to get deeply involved in that greatest story ever happening. And so that's exciting to think. Like art is a very therapeutic, thing, and it's cool because it's sort of like I've had different chapters of life where I think, oh, maybe I want to be some form of practitioner to help people with different kinds of healing work. And I don't know what my future holds very much right now, but what I'm doing is just talking to all kinds of creative people about how they've unblocked their passions and so getting in touch with that deeper self, I suppose. And so before I try to steer to with too much control, is there anything that you feel is um, any empty parts here that you want to fill in, or something exciting to go
The
to?
one thing I'm moved to say, because we're talking about art and creating a story, is don't be afraid of the pauses. I think a lot of us think filling every page with lots of writing makes the story better. But if you listen to beautiful music, sometimes it is the gap between notes that creates the context, right? If every single moment was filled with sound, you would just hear a tone. It's not very interesting to listen to. So when you feel like life is missing something, like me resting here in Bali, having come all across the world to do very little, can you enjoy that? And trust that that's still part of the song.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that a lot. I've definitely noticed that I have a strong inclination to always think I have to be achieving something. And even if I'm resting, it's to serve some future achievement. But what's the point of the achievement even? It's to be there for it, right? Like, unless I'm being, then what's the point of the doing?
Yeah. And accomplishing the thing often puts you at a sense of dissatisfaction because the state of being is now over, right? The activity of pursuing the thing lets you be in the present moment and put your head down in the present. Once you get to the thing, you lift your eyes up from the present moment and you go like, shit, that's back that way. I can't go back that way. And what's next? And you're left with this question mark and you're no longer in the present. There is no accomplishment. And I think that's something I'm also grappling with, being here. So I want to thank you for allowing me to have a little therapy session on this podcast.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. I've started to reframe it a little bit. And when I set goals, instead of seeing the goal as the prize, the goal is more just like the thing to give tension to the process. And the process is the actual thing. So it's like I might not even get to most of these goals. The goals will change, but there's things that are pulling me into movement, excited movement. So I'm learning to just be with the process and fully enjoy it, because it's time is passing on by, so
Beautiful.
might as well be
I love
here for
that. I see that having really kickstarted when you went on that trip. So I want to acknowledge that that hero's journey you went on has helped not only you but those around you, including myself. Remember, intention doesn't mean the destination is where you expect, but that you'll discover the destination every step of the way.
it. Yeah. So if someone listening to this is thinking about embarking on a big adventure, whether it's traveling or starting some new art project or a new art form or whatever it is, but of course maybe has fear around it or social pressures preventing it, what could you say to them right now?
I'm taking a pause just as I would invite you to do the same thing so that you can feel. And remember what makes you feel in love with this idea. And let yourself feel the love that comes by dreaming up the possibility of embarking on this journey. That's the thing motivating you. It's love. It's not the accomplishment of the thing. It's putting you in touch with beauty in some way. Remember that beauty, and it will start to move you into action. I want to see this painting come to fruition. I'm so in love with it just by feeling it right now. I have to act on it. Whether this thing finishes or not, I want to be in the process of lovemaking as soon as possible. And you apply that to anything, and the river will carry you where it's meant to.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I think that's a strong note for people to take away from this. And I'm going to let you return to that stillness and whatever else is going on. But really appreciate you, Logan. I'm glad you're on this adventure for yourself.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate being on this podcast and continuing this connection. Looking forward to seeing more of these episodes. So blessings on the starting of this podcast. And for everyone listening, thank you for listening. And I'll see you guys next time.
Thanks, Logan. We'll talk again soon. Today's episode of The Unblocked Creators is sponsored by me, Jesse James Carver, otherwise known as The Unblocked Carver. I have an invitation for you. The Creative Wayfinder is an 8-week-long initiation to reconnect you to the source of your creative power. To hear testimonials from the first round of Creative Wayfinders, check out the link in the description. Registration closes at the beginning of August 2025, or when all 10 participant seats are full. This is your chance to become the creator you were always meant to be, with a group holding you accountable, weekly live calls, and 8 weeks of comprehensive curriculum. It's time to address the root causes of creative stagnation through the powerful lenses of depth psychology, flow state science, and much more. Check out the link in the description to learn more.